Today, I want you to give me an hour, maybe a little bit more of your time, because what I'm about to tell you is happening right now on American soil. And the people who are supposed to be keeping you informed are burying it. There's a few people dead in Austin, Texas, a 19-year-old named Ryder Harrington, a 21-year-old named Savitha Shan. They went out on a Friday night with their friends, and they never came home. The man who murdered them was wearing a hoodie that said "Property of Allah" and an undershirt bearing the Iranian flag. His home was decorated with photographs of Iranian regime leaders. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force is investigating it as a potential act of terrorism. That happened one day after America went to war with Iran. 2 days after that, an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old drove from Pennsylvania to New York City with homemade bombs in their bags. They threw improvised explosive devices outside Gracie Mansion, the home of the New York City's mayor. Real IEDs, packed with TATP, the same explosive used in the London subway bombings, and loaded with nuts, bolts, and screws designed to tear through human flesh. When the FBI arrested them, they told investigators that they'd been watching ISIS videos. And a few weeks ago, a Southwest Airlines flight out of Nashville was diverted to Atlanta. Cops boarded with guns. Passengers were ordered heads down, hands up. 1.8 million people watched the video online. That number's probably way higher now. Are you paying attention now? Because here's the truth that corporate media is not assembling for you. We went to war with Iran, and the war followed us home. Not because this is a coincidence, not because this is random, but because Iran has been playing a very long game. And the pieces they put into place years ago are now moving. Today, I'm going to walk through all of it. What happened in Austin, what happened in New York, the pattern of radicalization that Washington has known about and refused to name, and what your faith calls you to do when the world catches fire.
Compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to Awaken America.
Let's start with the facts, because in this case, the facts are damning enough without embellishment. March 1st, 2026, one day after the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran. One day after Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the initial strikes. A 53-year-old naturalized American citizen named, and I'm going to screw this up, and I'm so sorry, Ndiaga Diagna, drove to Buford's backyard beer garden on 6th Street in Austin, Texas. It was just before 2 a.m. He rolled down his window and open-fired on a patio crowd with a pistol and a rifle. He kept shouting. 3 people were killed. 14 people were wounded. 5 were in critical condition. Austin police shot that man at the scene. Here's what the investigators found. On his body, a gray hoodie bearing the words "Property of Allah," and an undershirt with the Iranian flag. In his vehicle, what the FBI's acting special agent in charge of the San Antonio field office, Alex Duran, described publicly as indicators on the subject and in his vehicle that indicate a potential nexus to terrorism. In his home, an Iranian flag and photographs of Iranian regime leaders displayed inside his house. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force took over the investigation and began examining whether Diagna had self-radicalized and whether his timing one day after Khomeini's death was deliberate. Now let me ask you something. Where's the wall-to-wall national media coverage? Where are the Democrat politicians holding press conferences and naming these victims? Where is the 3-day candlelit vigil coverage that runs on Clinton News Network every time there's a shooting that fits the narrative that they want to push? You know where it is? It's buried. Because the political implications make it inconvenient. Because if you say Islamic radicalization and American soil in the same sentence, you are threatening a story that the left has spent 30 years telling. Now, here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to understand about Diagna. And this here is critical. He came to the United States in the year 2000 on a tourist visa. He married a U.S. citizen. He received a green card in 2006. He became a naturalized American citizen in 2013. The system processed him. The system vetted him. The system stamped his paperwork and handed him a passport, and 26 years later, that same system produced a man who decorated his home with Iranian regime propaganda, dressed himself in Islamic supremacist clothing, and committed what investigators believe is a terrorism-inspired massacre on a Friday night in Austin, Texas. This is the vetting question. And I want to be precise about it because precision matters on this show. This isn't simply an argument about illegal immigration, though that conversation is legitimate, and I'll get to the broader picture. This is about the entire system of deciding who we let in this country and what we actually know about what they believe when they get here. When you process someone without genuinely understanding their ideological commitments, without being willing to ask the hard questions about loyalty, about worldview, and what happens inside them when a foreign enemy of this nation is killed in battle, you're accepting everything they carry with them. Some of what Diagna carried with him festered quietly for years and then erupted on 6th Street at 2 a.m. Texas Governor Greg Abbott responded with exactly the right language. He said to anyone who thinks about using the current conflict in the Middle East to threaten Texans or our critical infrastructure, Texas will respond with decisive and overwhelming force. That is what a leader sounds like. The state deployed military resources under Operation Fury Shield within hours. That is a functioning government doing its job. But one governor in one state is not a national strategy. And right now, on the question of domestic terrorism inspired by the Iran war, we don't have one. Let's talk about New York, because this story is more complicated than Austin in some ways, and in some ways it's more alarming. On March 7th, 2026, Gracie Mansion, the official residence of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, two protest groups had converged outside. On the one side, approximately 20 people affiliated with right-wing activist Jake Lang marching under the banner, "Stop the Islamic Takeover of New York City." On the other side, approximately 125 counter-protesters organized under the banner, "Run the Nazis out of New York City." The NYPD had both groups separated into designated areas. And at 12:15 in the afternoon, a protester from Lang's group used pepper spray on a counter-protester, and he was arrested. Minutes later, an 18-year-old named Amir Balat from Langhorne, Pennsylvania, lit an improvised explosive device and threw it toward the protest area. It hit a barrier a few feet from NYPD officers, and then Balat ran, retrieved a second device from his 19-year-old companion, Ibrahim Kayumi. There, I think I did pretty good with those two names. Also from Pennsylvania. He lit it, and he dropped it. A third suspicious device was found Sunday in a nearby vehicle and removed by a bomb squad robot. Now let's talk about what those devices actually were. The NYPD bomb squad analyzed them. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch confirmed publicly it is, in fact, an improvised explosive device that could have caused serious injury or death. The devices were constructed with what investigators suspect is TATP, triacetone triperoxide, the same volatile explosive material used in the 2005 London transit bombings. And these things were packed with nuts, bolts, and screws. That's not a prank. That's not a smoke bomb. That is a fragmentation device built to put metal through human bodies. When Balat threw that device toward a crowd of people, he was trying to kill someone. Here's what Balat and Kayumi told investigators. They had been watching ISIS videos. One of them shouted, "Allahu Akbar," as he threw his little device. One directly referenced ISIS in his statements to the FBI. The Joint Terrorism Task Force launched a full federal terrorism investigation. Federal charges are expected. Now, I want to address something directly because intellectual honesty is what separates my show from the propaganda that you get everywhere else. The devices were thrown in the direction of Lang's group, not at the mayor or the mansion itself. Mayor Mamdani condemned both the protest and the violence. I'm telling you the full picture because the full picture is damning enough. And because if I didn't tell you the full picture, someone else will use parts that I leave out to discredit everything else that I said. That's not how I operate here. But here's why the full picture makes this more alarming, not less. Two American teenagers, 18 and 19 years old, born and raised in Pennsylvania, drove to Manhattan with TATP bombs, ISIS inspiration burning in their heads, and the willingness to deploy those devices at a political demonstration 1 week into Americans' war with Iran. The question is not whether they hit the right target. The question is what produced them. What radicalized them? What ideology told them that building fragmentation bombs and throwing them into a crowd of human beings was a righteous act? And that question, the radicalization question, the ideology question, is the question that our political and media establishment flatly refuses to ask. Because asking it honestly requires them to say things that they've decided that they'll never say. The left will tell you that naming this is Islamophobia. I'll tell you that not naming it is how people die. Those are the only two options on the table. Let's zoom out, because what happened in Austin and what happened outside Gracie Mansion are not isolated incidents. They're data points in a pattern that has been building for decades. And if you refuse to see the pattern, you will be surprised every single time it expresses itself. Let's talk about what Iran has actually been doing, because this is the part that the corporate media will never put together for you. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism for 40 consecutive years. They fund Hezbollah in Lebanon. They fund Hamas in Gaza. They fund militias in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. That is the part that gets reported occasionally, when the news cycle demands it. But their most patient investment, the one that doesn't make the front page, the one that plays out over decades rather than news cycles, is ideological. For 40 years, Iran has been exporting a worldview that says America is the great Satan, that the West is corrupt and must be destroyed, and that the men and women willing to die for that cause are heroes and martyrs. They spread the worldview through mosques, through media, through online platforms, through culture of communities scattered across the Western world. And here's the critical part that you need to understand. You do not have to take direct orders from Tehran to be a soldier in that war. The ideology is self-replicating. Once it takes root in a person's mind, it operates on its own. Iran, ISIS, and the broader ecosystem of radical Islamism have spent decades cultivating that worldview in vulnerable minds around the globe, including right here inside the borders of the United States. That strategy was always to wait, to let people come to the West legally, get processed by Western systems, get green cards and citizenship and jobs and houses, while the ideology runs quietly in the background. Let them look normal. Let them get woven into a fabric of the country. And then, when the moment is right, when America is at war, when the pressure is at its maximum, the pieces move. Diagna came to this country in 2000. He was naturalized in 2013. He lived here for 26 years. One day after America killed the supreme leader of Iran, he drove to a bar full of college kids and started shooting. That's not a coincidence. That's a strategy expressing itself. That's what happens when you let people into this country, legally or illegally, without genuinely understanding what they believe. Not just checking their criminal record, not just running their name through a database, actually understanding their ideological commitments, their loyalties. What they would do if the country gave them citizenship, went to war with the ideology they had privately embraced. That vetting process doesn't exist. Because the moment you propose it, the left calls you a bigot, and the conversation is over. And so the door stays open. And the ideology keeps walking through it. Connect the dots. Austin, an Iranian flag, Iranian regime photographs one day after the war starts. New York, ISIS-inspired teenagers. TATP bombs 1 week into the war. Nashville, a diverted flight, guns drawn, an aircraft full of terrified Americans on edge because they know what the threat environment is, even if their government won't tell them directly. It's not a coincidence. This is a threat environment that was constructed over years and decades, and it's now expressing itself on American streets in real time. And what are the Democrats doing about it? They voted almost unanimously to restrict the president's ability to prosecute this war. They're not holding press conferences naming Ryder Harrington and Sabbath Shan. They're not demanding answers about how two teenagers from Pennsylvania ended up at a Manhattan protest with TATP bombs and ISIS videos on their phone. They're fighting a war against Donald Trump. They're not fighting a war against the people who want to kill you. Those are not the same war. And the American people are starting to figure that out. Donald Trump is taking the foreign threat seriously. The question now is whether the full apparatus of American government, not just the president, not just one state's governor, has the courage to take that domestic threat seriously, to name the ideology, to fix the vetting system, to stop treating the honest analysis of jihadist radicalization as a thought crime. Because right now, we're fighting one half of this war with both hands tied behind our backs on the other half. And Americans are dying for it. I want to shift the register here for a few minutes. Because everything we've talked about today is real and urgent, and it demands a political and policy response. But underneath all of it, underneath the terrorism and the politics and the fear, there's a question that no policy can fully answer. What do you hold on to when the world catches fire? I think about Ryder Harrington, 19 years old. He went out on a Friday night the way 19-year-olds do, with his friends, not thinking about geopolitics or terrorism or the war that had started the day before. He had no idea that he was going to die. His parents had no idea that Saturday morning was going to change their lives forever. And that young man is gone. Gone because a radicalized man with Iranian regime symbols on his body and an ideology of death in his heart drove up and started shooting. There's no policy argument that comforts his parents. There's no political victory that gives him back. The Bible doesn't promise us safety. It never did. In John chapter 16, Jesus tells his disciples, in this world you will have trouble. He doesn't say you might. He didn't say some of you will. He says you will. Tribulation is not the exception to human existence in a fallen world. It's the baseline. And anyone who has built their sense of security entirely on the assumption that nothing bad will happen, that the war is always somewhere else, happening to someone else, is building on sand. But Jesus doesn't stop at the warning. He says, but take heart. I have overcome the world. That's the anchor. That's what the ideology of death, whether it comes dressed in a jihadi hoodie or in the hollow materialism of the secular left, can't touch. They offer death and they call it glory. Christianity offers life and calls it grace. That's not a political position. That's the most fundamental contest in human history, playing out again on the streets of Austin and New York. And I want to speak directly to the Christians listening to this show right now who are scared. You should take the threat seriously. You should be paying attention to your surroundings. You should be engaged politically and demanding that your government do its job. All of that is right and it's appropriate. But don't let fear become your master, because unchecked, unanchored fear is what produces the same darkness that produced those bombs. It's what produces dehumanization, the rage, the willingness to treat entire communities as the enemy. That path leads somewhere none of us want to go. The Christian response to real, genuine, people are dying terror is not passivity. Romans 13 is clear. The governing authority bears the sword as God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. We are right to demand our government use that sword. We are right to vote for leaders who will use that sword. We are right to speak up, to refuse to be silenced, to name what we are dealing with, even when the cultural establishment punishes us for it. That's not unchristian. That is stewardship. That is our responsibilities as citizens of a nation that was built on the idea that human beings are made in the image of God and that their lives have infinite worth. Pray for the families in Austin tonight. Pray for the officers who ran toward that IED in New York without knowing whether a second one was coming. Pray for the wisdom for the people making decisions in Washington right now. And then get up tomorrow and fight like it depends on you. Because it does. And because the God who overcomes the world does not call us to sit on the sidelines while the world burns. Let me bring it all together. 1 week into Operation Epic Fury, America and Israel's military campaign against Iran, the domestic threat environment in the United States had already fundamentally shifted. We're not watching this war from a safe distance. It's arrived on our streets. In Austin, Americans are dead, and 14 are wounded after a man dressed in Iranian regime symbols opened fire on a crowd of college students. The FBI is investigating it as a potential terrorism. In New York City, 2 teenagers from Pennsylvania deployed TATP fragmentation devices at a public demonstration after immersing themselves in ISIS propaganda. Federal terrorism charges are coming. In Nashville, a flight full of ordinary Americans was diverted and met by cops with guns drawn. Because the fear in this country right now is real, rational, and the direct result of a threat environment that our government has been too cowardly to honestly describe. Iran has been playing a long game. They've spent 30 years exploiting an ideology designed to produce exactly the kind of violence we're now seeing. They didn't need to issue orders. They didn't need a network of handlers. They planted ideas. They cultivated worldviews. They let people come to this country through legal channels. Well, that ideology ran quietly in the background. And they waited for the moment when America would be at war and the pressure would be at its peak. That movement is now. And the pieces are moving. This is what happens when a nation refuses to vet what it allows inside its borders. When a political class decides that asking hard ideological questions is bigotry. When a media establishment buries the stories that threaten its preferred narrative. When Democrats vote to restrict the president's ability to fight a war while doing nothing about the domestic threat the war has activated. The price of that cowardice is being paid right now in body bags in Texas and in a New York City street where a bomb squad robot had to remove a device packed with shrapnel. Donald Trump is fighting the war abroad. The question is whether this country has the courage to fight the war at home, to name the ideology, fix the vetting system, and stop treating the honest analysis of jihadist radicalization as a thought crime. We're going to keep asking that question. We're going to keep naming what corporate media refuses to name. We're going to keep telling the truth, even when the establishment punishes people for telling it. That's why this show exists. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. The fight is worth having, and we're not done. Before I go, I need to ask for your support, because this show, this entire network, runs on you, not on advertisers with agendas, not on corporate money with strings attached, not on political handlers who want to manage the message. Just you, the listeners, who understand that independent media that tells the truth is worth fighting for. What you heard today, the Austin shooting, the Gracie Mansion IED attack, the full picture of what's happening in this country in just the first week of the Iran war. You're not going to hear it assembled this way anywhere else. Not from Clinton News Network, not from misinformation spread by narcissists, brainwashing credulous, not from most of the right-wing media that's too busy chasing clicks to do actual work. I do the work. I stay independent doing it. And I can only keep doing it because of listeners like you. Go to titdusa.com and click the Stand Against the Silence campaign. Whatever you can give, it goes directly to keeping the voices on air. And if you're already a subscriber, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Share this episode. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. That's how we grow. That's how we get the message out there. That's how we fight the narrative control together. You can stand with us on YouTube, search Courage in the Darkness. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Patreon. Subscribe wherever you listen. Leave a review. It matters more than you know. The silence they want from us, we refuse it. Every single week. Stand with us, support the mission, refuse the silence, and I'll see you next time.